Welcome to Banking on KC. I'm your host, Kelly Scanlon. Thank you for joining us. With us on this episode is serial entrepreneur Whitney VinZant, the founder of Louie's Wine Dive and president of VinZant Restaurants and VinZant Wines. Welcome, Whit.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
So many things to cover here. I always knew about Louie's Wine Dive, but I did not know about these other endeavors that you have. But let's start with Louie's Wine Dive, because a lot of people here in Kansas City especially know it. It's familiar to them. Tell us about its roots.
The roots of Louie's Wine Dive go back much further than the concept itself. I started in restaurants in high school. Through college at Wake Forest, I worked in restaurants as well. And following graduation, initially began my restaurant career with franchises.
Any that we would recognize? Or
we developed Old Chicago restaurants, learned a great deal from those franchises, and they were successful. But as time went by, both myself and our company began really wanting to do our own restaurants. Just had that inspiration, I think, a passion for product. We went back to one of the products we loved, which was wine, and saw an opportunity for a restaurant that was neighborhood oriented, selling good food, good and fresh wines, different varietals that people don't see every day at a value. That led into Louie's Wine Dive. I think the concept itself continues to get stronger and stronger. I think the reason for that is really the team. At this point, first Louie's Wine Dive in Des Moines, Iowa, near 15 years old. We have locations in Clayton, in St. Louis, and also in Overland Park. Each acts differently, but a similarity between them is the teams are really good.
yeah, I mean, I've been into them, and uniformly, the team members are familiar with your wines, can make good suggestions and knowledgeable suggestions, and service is always great.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And to that end, we do a great deal of training. We have many certified somms within Louie's Wine Dive. They're passionate about it. And I'm always really happy to see when it does show.
You've also acquired, if I remember right, Taco Republic, BRGR, Graham and Dunn, a lot. I mean, the list is pretty lengthy these days. You were talking about your team. When you are spread out across so many different brands and geographic locations, how do you keep a culture intact? When I go into Des Moines versus St. Louis versus Kansas City, or BRGR versus a Graham and Dunn versus a Louie's Wine Dive, how do you keep that culture consistent across all those variables?
That is challenging, and that goes across, I think, many businesses, many industries. Within restaurants, the culture and the values of those teams is the determining factor as to how successful that restaurant's going to be. Oftentimes we get caught up in how restaurants look, the brick, the mortar,
right?
All
kind of pictures on the walls.
Exactly. All these there's a lot of different factors that can come into it. But at the end of the day, I think people can feel when you're genuine. They can feel when things are operating the right way. The way that we continue that in Des Moines and St. Louis, Pittsburgh, some of these other markets is, first and foremost, that's where we start our discussions. And that's where we end our discussions too. So we talk about, operational sets and product and all these things that certainly have a huge effect on ultimately the dining experience we deliver. But the philosophy behind, some very simple things, doing good to your neighbor, treating them as you want to be treated, that's the important stuff. We oftentimes talk about how our leaders have to showcase that. Ultimately, at some point within a restaurant, the team and the values of the restaurant should reflect upon the individual, not just in the restaurant, but also outside of it.
You have all these different brands. Many of them have come through acquisition. So when you are trying to acquire another company, another brand, what is it that you look for in it?
Team first, product right behind that. Does it provide a compelling experience for its guests? Is there a durable competitive advantage with what they're doing. As a report card, the financials tend to say the same thing. So superior unit economics are something we look for as well.
Yeah. So besides the financials, what is distinguishing it from your competition out there?
You look at loyalty.
Right.
You look at how strong the brand is. As you get into further details, look at location. Is it, a location that's going to generate success in the future? But ultimately, some of those, the brand, the product, the team, they coalesce. And within that, we want to be involved with brands that have the ability to achieve enduring success. So that's the first step. Second step, can we add value?
You don't want to just maintain the status quo. You want to take it to the next level.
We do. Now, we have to define a lot of these brands. Waldo Pizza, for example, a recent acquisition, December 9th last year. If I change, the pizza, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be thrown out of town.
They're going to run you out.
So,
Exactly.
you have your bedrock that you absolutely maintain and keep to the same quality standard. But, is there a way that we can look at the leasehold or the property, the building itself, and make it more unique and desirable for guests? I think, certainly with our breadth of knowledge with product, food, and beverage, there's a lot of local purveyors that we work with, and they produce superior product than purchasing that through other means. I'd also say, as a restaurateur, that with it and our team that's been in this business and learned a lot of different things, can we define that dining experience in a way that is more satisfying to our guests? For example, you mentioned wine. How do we pair that with some of the food at Waldo Pizza? And what can we do to make that unique? Those are the things that it gets to be really fun.
People don't necessarily go into a pizza restaurant expecting to get a really nice glass of wine.
Absolutely.
If you can create that kind of experience, well, that's all the better. You've expanded into a variety of different cities, as we've established. You're out in California too with the winery. Why do you keep Kansas City as your headquarters?
It's home. I love Kansas City. It wasn't always my home. I moved here 14, 15 years ago.
So you're still relatively new.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I guess.
Where did you move from?
From Kentucky.
Okay.
Yeah, where I met my wife, Emily, and we've had 4 children here.
Oh, wow.
And we don't intend to have any more. But the Kansas City quickly became home for us. And, it's the people, the attractions the city has. It's wonderful also to raise children here.
Yeah. So in many ways, the city emulates what you're trying to achieve with your brand.
I think so.
The focus on the people. You mentioned that first. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about some of the different things that you look for in your acquisitions. And I think everybody's pretty familiar with the fact that the restaurant business is not an easy one. It's fraught with lots of things. I mean, every business is, but especially with restaurants, margins are typically low. You have to deal with constant employee turnover. It's a challenge. And then you have something like the COVID pandemic. I mean, maybe it's only a once in 100-year thing, but it's still a thing when it happens. So those are just a few that come to mind. It's not even talking about the shifts in consumer tastes, their expectation, the different dining concepts that you're constantly having to compete against. So tell us about how it's changed during your time in the industry, nearly 2 decades now, and how have you managed to grow in spite of those challenges? I know that the culture is huge, but talk about how you've managed to become not just a success with the one, but successful enough to be able to start acquiring and to move into other areas.
Looking back on it, when we determined to, take a step towards being more entrepreneurial, doing our own restaurants, we had to learn a lot with that. Along that path, we made so many different mistakes. I mean, I look back on it, and certain menu items we introduced, just crazy. But that's how you learn.
Sure.
You don't know how far you can push it till you push it too far. You have to learn that along the way. I think authenticity and genuine product, those are two elements. I think our general guests have become much more astute in seeing. In general, full service restaurants, where you're enjoying the atmosphere and your company for a little bit longer, they certainly feel whether or not, this food was made from scratch, whether or not, this wine is satisfying, or these cocktails or beer. That's something that we can distinguish ourselves from more of the chain national competition, which is, that comes with its own set of ideas.
So what are some of the trends that you have seen over the 2 decades that you think have stuck, that are here to stay? And then, but some of the ideas that were flash in the pan that people glommed onto, and it turned out people aren't really excited about that.
Yeah. So the trend, more complex, consumers in general.
Yes. A little more savvy.
Much more. Yeah. When we started Louie's Wine Dive, our competition from a wine standpoint, the vast, not all of them, but the vast majority of restaurants were, serving, the same brands by the glass.
You still see that to a certain extent.
You still do. Yeah. But now you can go to so many restaurants and try such selections. And the same is true with food, right? So I think that you're seeing more and more adventurous dining. When I first started, 2005, 2006, with our own restaurants, you didn't see, the foodie concept just wasn't then what it is now.
Yeah, there's a willingness to try new items.
There is. And I think we see that in very real ways too. So, last year, I formalized an agreement with Teresa and Richard Ng of Bow and Wing. In doing that, we had many discussions. They've been in the business 41 years, maybe 42 years now. They've seen huge changes. And the way that entire friendship came about was I met them, at a wedding. Restaurateurs oftentimes have a camaraderie. Yes. And we were able to, get together following that. And we really began having these dinner dates where he would do something, a Sichuan dish, for example, that, I'd never even heard of or imagined. And then I had to try to compensate on my side, which became quite challenging pretty quick. But one thing that I asked Richard along the way, I said, there are all these, these really complex dishes that you're making. I just love some of these. A steamed turbo, made in a soy, ginger, orange sauce. And why aren't these on your menu? And he said, well, during the 80s, during the 90s, this isn't how our guests want to use us.
And now people actually come to a restaurant knowing that the menu's not going to be the same from month to month, or, there's just seasonal concepts and so forth.
So every fall, we take our chefs on different inspirational trips. And we were at Gramercy Tavern in New York this year. Chef Michael Anthony said, he commented how far specifically the Midwest had progressed with its food. The food scene in Kansas City speaks for itself.
You are a serial entrepreneur. We've talked a little bit about VinZant Wines, and that's in California's Sonoma Valley. What inspired that move?
Passion for wine, passion for product first, but I really have enjoyed wine in a lot of different scenarios, and it's been a large part of my career.
I was going to ask you, did that love of wine and appreciation for it start because of your exposure in the restaurant business,
Absolutely.
Or did it precede that?
No, it was absolutely the restaurant business, and largely Louie's Wine Dive in many ways. The concept of the vineyard and the growing of product it just really called to me. So it was something that I'd wanted to do for 11, 12 years, and I was entirely unsuccessful with getting it started for 8 of those, 7.5.
Were you trying, or just you were too busy?
I was actively involved. During that time, we figured out a lot and learned a lot. Along the way, we obtained representation, to try to find us the right vineyard that had this specific criteria, and that doesn't happen every day.
No, it doesn't.
So
yeah. Well, and the wine industry is very complex. As somebody's sitting there drinking their glass of wine, at its very heart, it's agricultural. You talk about the vineyard. You were so choosy or picky about what vineyard it was going to be because that's so important, the terroir and everything else that goes with that. You've got the art and science of winemaking on top of the agricultural. And then, of course, you've got sales, you've got delivery, and all of the business aspects of it. So how do you manage all those things?
So they grow together. One thing I've seen, even in California, is a lot of the growers and the winemakers are not constantly in touch with the people who are drinking their wine. So when we look at what varietals sell, what price points within those varietals sell, that's something I've been doing that for 20 years.
Well, that's where the restaurant industry serves you well, being in tune with your customers, going out on the floor and saying hello to them.
That's reinforced on a daily basis. That's a huge advantage going into that. So we could reverse engineer a lot of these decisions. The production side has been the most challenging for us. We are fortunate to have a wonderful winemaker, Adam Lee and Murray Braylon, both are working on our wines. I had long-standing 20-year relationships with them. We also have a wonderful vineyard manager who works on our wine, and that's really where the wine is created. In fact, when you see the labels, you'll see photographs of the vineyard. We work 90% of our times in the vineyard.
In addition to being in tune with your customers, you are in tune with the land itself and with the vineyard, with your crop, because you've mentioned you like to spend as much time as you can out there with your vineyard manager and your team there.
Yes, yeah. 19 flights in the last 12 months.
19?
19.
Oh.
So I know, Sacramento or Oakland or STS. Yeah. I know them well.
And you are talking about airline flights,
yes.
not wine flights.
Yeah,
so.
No. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm involved all the way from pruning through, I'm a licensed chemical applicator now.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Okay.
Through all the farming and harvest. Really enjoy all parts of it. Right now, we're making some big decisions out there specific to certain clones of Cabernet that we're planting. So we're getting quite detailed in what we're doing.
Your vineyard, if I remember right, is fairly high up the side of a mountain, isn't it? It's not in the valley, so the
Correct.
Cabernet would grow very well up there.
Correct. We wanted mountainside vineyard, and I think it has an elevation change of 700 feet. So we have certain slopes within the vineyard up to 38 degrees.
The different microclimates. Yep.
Tremendous. Yeah. And the terroir, it's all volcanic stone within that range, and so it's very challenging to farm. Everything's done by hand. For example, we planted 3.1 acres last year, and out of the vines that we planted, over half of them, we had to hammer drill the stone out to put soil in those holes so that the vines had something to hold on to begin their growth.
But that actually makes the wine even better, because when they struggle to grow like that, I mean, it doesn't seem logical, but it really is. The wines are so much more beautiful.
It gives them a sense of place.
What is your favorite varietal? What do you like to drink?
Ooh, I haven't met too many I dislike. It really just depends on the setting. It depends on what we're eating. Starting with champagne and Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. It's fascinating. All the way through Cabernet and red blends. I think there's so much good wine out there that needs to be experienced today. if I had one recommendation towards doing that, try to, specifically for people new to it or maybe don't understand a lot about it, stick with a varietal or stick with an appellation, stick with a place and get to understand that before you move on to a bunch of different wines, because that becomes quite confusing really fast.
What's next for your businesses?
Next for the businesses, well, our teams want to grow some of our restaurants. So that is high on my priority list. I have no interest in growing for growth's sake. I want to grow restaurants that we can take a great deal of pride in and make unique and wonderful for its guests. So, that authenticity, that really is important to us. And I would say that may be a good example for how our wine side of the business is affecting our restaurant side of the business. They complement each other. And in some ways, I think it's made us better across the board. So I think, we're hyper focused on the team and the quality that the teams can create.
Well, and it's showing. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your story and about where you're going and what's made you successful. As you said, some of this applies to so many other businesses as well. So we appreciate those insights.
Thanks, Kelly.
This is Joe Close, president of Country Club Bank. Thank you to Whitney VinZant for being our guest on this episode of Banking on KC. From founding Louie's Wine Dive to expanding his business portfolio with multiple brands, Whit's entrepreneurial journey reflects a passion for hospitality, a commitment to team culture, and a dedication to quality. His vision has fueled the success of his businesses and also enriched Kansas City's diverse dining scene. At Country Club Bank, we value the connections that make Kansas City a stronger, more vibrant place to live and work, and we are proud to support the entrepreneurs who help create those meaningful experiences. Thanks for tuning in this week. We're banking on you, Kansas City. Country Club Bank, member FDIC.